Currently, when Sudanese unity is under serious threat, the army has become the backbone of the country's statehood. The population is fleeing to areas under its control for protection. It is very important to support the country's state institutions. This can be the basis in future for intra-Sudanese inter-ethnic dialogue, when all political, intercommunal groups and well-respected regional leaders, without exception, can decide together the general path for the country's development. All participants of the dialogue should furthermore enjoy the support of all Sudanese and speak on behalf of and in the interest of the Sudanese people and not foreign backers. The outcome of the dialogue should be to have contours of the future authorities of the country sketched out which are acceptable for all. Including addressing the key question, the unification of the Sudanese armed forces. The Russian Federation considers the Sovereign Council as the supreme legitimate authority in Sudan. We are in favour of maintaining its unity, territorial integrity and sovereignty. In this regard, we support the efforts of the UN SG Personal Envoy, Mr. Lamara, for the swift attainment of peace and stability. We believe that the Personal Envoy's goal is to unify the various regional and international mediation efforts on Sudan. We wish him every success in achieving the plan to organize the negotiations with the Sudanese parties. However, we do not deem it appropriate to push forward third-party negotiation formats to settle the situation in Sudan. This would ignore the participation of the current government of the country and would not take into consideration their points of view in terms of finding solutions to the crisis. We're convinced that the withdrawal of the RSF and having a ceasefire is a key to ensuring due protection of Sudanese population. Any steps that would preempt this without the prior agreement of Port Sudan are not acceptable. We also deem at this point in time it's not acceptable to talk about a UN presence or that of African peacekeepers. As is rightly pointed out in the UN Secretary General's report on the protection of civilians in Sudan, conditions are not yet in place for this. We view such calls currently as blatant populism because no one can answer the question as to which areas of the country they would be deployed in or what goals the deployed troops would have. Furthermore, the request for such a presence should solely come from the existing Sudanese leadership. Otherwise, any peacekeeping endeavours during an active phase of this domestic conflict might be doomed to disaster. Having such a scenario might once and for all undermine the trust that Sudan has in the UN. The UN's reputation was seriously tarnished by the inconsistent work of the UNITAM's mission that was drawn down. As we mentioned earlier, Jeddah is at the moment the only existing agreement. Therefore, we believe it's important to step up work to enact these agreements that cover humanitarian matters, the issue of the protection of civilians, and also finding a political solution to the drawn-out crisis. It's important to ensure that all of its provisions be upheld, including the withdrawal of armed units from towns and villages. Mr. President, the humanitarian situation in Sudan remains very serious. Almost 3/4 of the medical facilities are not working, and there's a shortage of medication. 2/3 of the people do not have access to medical services. We've seen the spread of deadly diseases. A serious threat is the non-implementation of the humanitarian response plan by the country. This is less than 2/3 covered. We'd like to assure the Sudanese that we support them in overcoming the suffering that they're experiencing. Within our means, we are providing assistance. We know that many other countries, despite their difficulties, are also using opportunities to provide assistance. The Sudanese government also is taking necessary steps to ensure that assistance reaches the population. The decisions to open up land, air and maritime crossing points to supply humanitarian assistance throughout the country, including at the Adre border crossing with the border with Chad, proves this. We're convinced that improved work of such crossing points is possible if representatives of humanitarian structures working in Sudan and primarily OCHA do what is proposed by Port Sudan. This includes having the authorities present on the ground, including specialised equipment. Any justifications by humanitarian workers that such plans are not feasible are, in our view, inappropriate. We have examples of a number of Arab Muslim countries throughout the world proving that where there is a will, if we don't link humanitarian assistance with politics, aid can be supplied, and including to areas in Sudan that are hard to access. These claims are particularly odd, given that the main problem of supplying humanitarian assistance is created by the RSF. It's crucial that humanitarian agencies work in conjunction with the Sudanese government and not the opposite. A final decision, furthermore, on the use of a particular crossing point for assistance being supplied is the sovereign choice of the Sudanese government. We also believe it's premature to talk about the threat of imminent famine in Sudan. There is food in the country. For example, there was a record sorghum harvest. The question is how to get this to the people who need it in the areas under the control of the RSF. It's important for humanitarian workers to give an objective assessment of the situation, aligning with the Sudanese government. Mr. President, we believe that the response of the Security Council to the situation in Sudan should be balanced and should be based on the actual realities in the country. Any destructive external interference in the affairs of our friend Sudan is unacceptable. We trust that the UN will be guided by these principles, supporting sovereign decisions and not imposing any external blanket solutions. Russia stands in firm support of those efforts to find a lasting settlement to the Sudanese conflict. We are convinced that the Sudanese people can and will, on their own, resolve their domestic problems.